Hello and welcome to an off-season edition of the Rotoworld Baseball Show. I'm your host, Eric Samulski, joined by my two frequent co-hosts all together at once. It's Scott Pianowski. It's James Schiano. Guys, how are you doing? We ready to talk baseball? I know, Scott, you're deep in the football woods, but we're going to pretend it doesn't exist today.
Yeah, happy with that after the Rams and 49ers gave us nothing. And look at James flexing. He's all excited about Juan Soto rocking his Mets hat. I'm rocking my Whalers hat. They have not signed anybody this offseason, but I think it's been a great winter meetings, right? I mean, we knew the Soto deal was probably going to happen soon, but we've seen baseball trades, trades that we saw coming, trades that we didn't see coming. Mm-hmm. And to me, trades are more interesting to me than signing sometimes. And just it's a lot to dig into. I'm actually starting my fresh set of rankings for the Yahoo season, and we're doing a Rotoworld mock draft right now. So as far as I'm concerned, it's fantasy baseball season.
Yeah, I agree. It's been baseball all the time for me for the last week and a half now, since we were on Soto Watch, then Soto Celebration. Yesterday was the Soto press conference. So now I'm just worried about the rest of the Mets offseason and also really enjoying probably the most exciting winter meetings in the last decade at least.
For sure. And if anybody out there missed any of it or needs any kind of like recap on all of it, obviously we're going to talk about stuff here today. There's also more in-depth stuff over at NBC Sports. We did a fantasy fallout article on basically every single trade or signing from the winter meeting. So if you want kind of more in-depth discussion, obviously go check that out. And then this is just a general plug that, we're going to talk at the end of the episode about some players that haven't signed or might get traded, and nothing has happened right now. So obviously, keep it locked to Rotoworld. Go to the player news. We're going to get it up and, out as soon as it happens. So kind of keep refreshing that. I before even working here, I kept the Rotoworld player news up, like bookmarked and open in, baseball offseason. And I would keep refreshing as a way to kind of get the most up-to-date rumors. So, obviously, I'm a company man now, but I would highly encourage you to do that. Listen, baseball gods smiled on us, guys. 15 minutes before we started recording today, they said, you know what? Let's give them a trade to talk about. And the Milwaukee Brewers traded all-star closer Devin Williams to the Yankees for Nestor Cortez and minor league infielder Caleb Durbin. If that seems light to you, it's just understand that Devin Williams is in the final year of an expiring contract. So there's no guarantee he re-signs with the Yankees. Obviously, the Brewers were happy to get something from him, considering they did the same thing they did with Corbin Burnes, where they were like penny pinching him in arbitration over tens of thousands of dollars, like no money whatsoever. We know who Nestor Cortez is. Caleb Durbin is a really interesting minor league infielder. He's only 5'6". He is an incredibly high contact rate player. He can play all around the infield. 270 career minor league hitter with, as Scott loves it, more career minor league walks than strikeouts. He also set the Arizona Fall League record for stolen bases this year. The Brewers infield is going to be Caleb Durbin, Bryce Terang, and Joey Ortiz in some formation. With Terang and Durbin, it's just speed on speed on speed on speed. And the Brewers are just going to basically hope to score runs by stealing every single base imaginable. James, what should people know about Durbin? Is he kind of Bryce Terang 2.0? Do you like that for fantasy? Where is this from the Brewers standpoint? And then obviously we'll get to the Devin Williams side of it.
I think I even like Durbin's contact rates a little bit more than Bryce Terang. I think this opens the door now for, like you said, the Ortiz, Bryce Terang, Caleb Durbin, Tyler Black, just run and go offense like we're going to see. But I don't know if this trade's as light as some people are saying. I understand Devin Williams is one of the best relievers in baseball, but Nestor Cortez in 500 innings as a Yankee has a 3.3 ERA, and he's going to slide into the back of his Brewers rotation that desperately needs more bodies there, more depth, because we don't know what they're going together. Brandon Woodruff, Aaron Savali is still, I think, a bit of a question mark, and Tobias Myers is also still a bit of a question mark. And their bullpen's going to step up still with Trevor McGill, Joel Payamps, Elvis Figueroa, and we still don't know where DL Hall is going to fit. Nick Mears was
my DL Hall shares, James. I need it to happen, man.
It's still going to happen. Every 6 starts at 120 innings, no doubt. But I don't know. Durbin, to me, he's exactly what this Brewers team loves. He's going to slap the ball around. He's going to get on base. He's going to have a good at-bat. He's going to be very annoying to play against. It never really felt that was the guy the Yankees were going to the season, giving 5 appearances. It definitely feels like some of the Brewers are going to go into the season willing to give 500 plate appearances. Again, I think people are underrating Nestor Cortez a little bit. Again, 3.3 ERA over 500 innings with the Yankees.
That's true. And the Yankees, obviously they signed Max Fried, which we'll get to in a little bit. So they had a little surplus in the rotation. So it wasn't a huge loss to get rid of Cortez. They were able to get arguably the best closer in baseball. Scott, is Devin Williams RP1 right now? Is he the first reliever off the board now that we know he's in New York?
Yeah, my main keeper league, we have Devin Williams as an inexpensive keeper. Got him at the beginning of last season when he was hurt. And when things went bad with him and the Brewers and things soured, you just worry about where's he going to get traded to. You would think he'd be a closer anywhere, but when he gets traded to a team that isn't maybe a winning team, whatever. Other than the fact that I'm a Red Sox fan, he went to a perfect spot. I mean, he went, now I have to root for the Yankees to win games, and I'm not thrilled about that, but whatever. I mean, New York, even without Soto, I mean, they're set up. And I realized last year, all I did before the season is pound the table on the Yankee under. And then I spent 6 months looking stupid, maybe 7 months if you want to include the playoffs. But Devin Williams traded to a team that validates him. And it's one of the 3 or 4 teams in baseball that's already probably in the playoffs. And so I feel really good about that. And also just Williams can clear his mind. We knew when the relationship soured, this was not going to be something you wanted hanging over his head. This gets done early. I'm sorry for anybody who had, Luke Weaver dreams of him maybe coming back as the closer. He'll obviously go back to a setup role. So as a Williams manager, as somebody who has a stake in his outcome, I feel really glad that he went where he went. And with the Brewers, we've seen them operate as a, not a big market team. And, they lost so much in recent years. Their manager, their team architect, their number one pitcher, and they came back stronger than ever. They win the division. They're just a really smart team, and the way they're building this team with defense and with being good at secondary and tertiary things. I mean, Brad, they have Churio who's a superstar already. Maybe they'll get Yelich back at a high level, but I think the Brewers are a really smart organization. I don't think the way they handled Williams was maybe the right move, but I think the haul they got was a good one. I agree that Cortez is maybe getting a little bit underserved when people negotiate this trade, but it's cheap to say a win-win for both teams. But I think it's a win-win for both teams. And it's a win for fantasy managers because we have players in roles and situations that we want them to be in.
Yeah. The Luke Weaver dreams are dead, but James, are the Trevor McGill dreams alive and well right now?
Oh, Trevor McGill dreams are very alive and well. He suddenly becomes an easy top 10 closer in the fantasy landscape. I think blatantly with that job and how effective he was. And also probably, I think Devin Williams is amazing. I think his floor is probably RP3 in fantasy, but you're getting a guy who has struggled with both walks and fly balls going to a stadium where if you combine those two things, it can get a little dicey.
And back injuries.
Yes, and broken hands from punching water coolers.
Right, and scar tissue from the playoffs, right? I mean, the home run he allows to James's Mets, the Alonso opposite field home run, which is one of the most dramatic moments we saw in the whole baseball playoff. So he's going to have, we know if you're a cornerback or a closer, you have to have a short memory. I mean, Williams needs to wipe that clean.
Yeah, he's again. So I think the floor is top 3, but those are 2 traits I don't love from a Yankees closer.
Yeah, super exciting. Obviously, the Brewers will be getting back Abner Uribe, who had knee surgery in the middle of last year. But I think, Trevor McGill looked so good in that closer's role. You'd have to assume that he has it to start the year. But again, something to keep an eye on in spring training. But I agree with James. I'm heavily invested in Trevor McGill. I was last year, and so I'm happy to roll the dice here. James, before we get into some of the other reactions, I just want to give you some space if there's anything you want to say about the Juan Soto deal before we move on. DJ and I covered it. We have articles all over the site, but I want to give you some time.
Yeah, you guys did a great job covering it. You did a great recap the next day. I did one just putting the scope of how much money Juan Soto's made and is going to make in this contract. But just as a Mets fan who's nearly 30 years old, like I've grown up in a Yankees world. It's never even been close to anything in the Mets. And for this move to happen, to go head-to-head with the Yankees, for Steve Cohen to put his stamp on this city in such a profound way, it just shouldn't be. It's sad because my sports fandom has included not much winning in my life, but it's truly life-changing from a sports perspective, especially someone that works in the field, makes content, like especially with the Mets, for the Mets Up podcast. It's incredible this is going to happen. He's going to be the most talented Met I have may ever seen in my entire life. It's watching the press conference yesterday and seeing David Stern smile from ear to ear and just grinning, and seeing Stephen Alex Cohen up there with Soto, seeing the dais with 30 members of Juan Soto's family taking pictures and cheering and clapping and smiling. it was a beautiful moment for the Mets and a real like coming of age of this new Mets organization with Steve Cohen. It's been 3 years in the making of really trying to build a monster, and this is a very important step to actually doing that, becoming Dodgers East, as the Mets have said out loud.
I fully agree. I'll push back on only one thing. The greatest Met you've ever seen already played for the Mets, and his name is Jacob deGrom. And we'll never see dominance quite like we saw from that gentleman. Unfortunately, obviously, the injuries took their toll. But yeah, super excited. We'll talk about some other potential Mets moves later in the podcast that haven't yet happened, but might happen to round out the offseason.
But by the way, deGrom keeps being drafted really early in every draft I'm looking at, including the mock that we're in. And again, that keeper league, I know nobody cares about my keeper league. We have Jacob deGrom, and I think Eric and I have talked about this. I would love it if we can get 90 innings, 100 innings from deGrom. Yeah. I think I'd sign up right now. They would love it if he could have like a Tyler Glasnow season. Do what the Dodgers do. Pitch 3 or 4 months and be ready in the playoffs, something like that. There's even been rumors that maybe the Mets might kick the tires if deGrom becomes available. Because Cohen, Steve Cohen too. He's doing what everybody says they would do if they owned the team. Just do everything you can, put everything on the table to win, not care about spend. And it's so frustrating to see the teams that pocket the money, right? I'm a Patriots fan. Bob Kraft doesn't want to spend money on a weight room or taking care of his players. He wants to keep it in his pocket. And Steve Cohen's like, okay, I'll spend it. What does it cost? Doesn't matter. And the fact that the Mets can get a win while they're pushing the Yankees down at the same time. I mean, that's just what a dream. You already have the best announcing team in baseball with those 3 guys. And now you have Soto. James, one thing I will say, what's your take on what the people who say, well, Soto, he's a bad defender. He's going to be a DH soon enough. That's kind of a negative to this trade. What's your spin on the Soto defense?
Don't care. Honestly, there's also a situation where to expand on it more, he was playing right field last year with Aaron Judge playing center. Aaron Judge has nowhere close to the best range in the league. Probably some of the worst range for center field. He had good metrics there, but I think having a center field defense where every single day you put Juan Soto next to the best center field defender you can, which Jose Siri, who the Mets acquired earlier in the offseason, is one of the defenders you can have. I think that will help a lot. I don't think it'll help a ton. I think he's still going to be a bad defender. I think he's still going to be a bad base runner. I'm still not excited for paying 37-year-old Juan Soto $55 million. But the 10 years until that happens, I'm going to be locked into every single Juan Soto at bat, and I cannot wait to see him play for this team.
I'll give you an ancillary piece to this too. I'm curious what you guys think, because I took Mark Vientos in the mock draft that we're doing. Had a great, 4 months last year. He's right now projected to be the number 3 hitter in this lineup. Soto hitting second. We'll see what happens if they can find a way to bring Alonso back or not. But are you guys with me that Mark Vientos, that what he did last year was real? And just anybody who's batting behind the OBP machine that is Juan Soto, and Lindor, of course, is a superstar in the leadoff spot. I don't know where they'll hit Nimmo, but are you guys with me that Vientos is a winner in this deal too?
Yeah, I am. I am of the mind that, and I guess I was going to talk about Pete Alonso at the end of the show, but we may as well bring it up here. The market for Pete isn't great right now. I know that the Cubs are like kind of interested. The Mariners are like kind of interested. I think Pete winds up back in New York. I think Vientos is at third or DH, depending on, if the Mets, I know the Mets have been linked to like Jock Peterson and some guys like that who could fill in the DH spot. But I think there's a very realistic shot. It's Lindor 1, Soto 2, some combination of Pete and Vientos, Nimmo, maybe a Jock Peterson type at DH. Like, that's a really solid top of the batting order. I think Vientos is going to be somewhere 3, 4, 5 in that batting order. There were very real strides in his contact, his plate discipline and his contact that he made last year, that this dude is not maybe like a 270, 280 hitter, but his power is very real. And I don't think he's a batting average drain like he showed his first trip up to the big leagues. I think he is a fine batting average hitter who will go on some hot streaks, and the power is very legit. And Soto's going to be on base a lot in front of him. And so, I'm happy to be drafting Mark Vientos in a lot of formats with just third base eligibility, let alone if he winds up picking up first base eligibility as well. I'm on board with Vientos there for sure.
And what a division, man. I mean, the Phillies are still loaded. The Braves, who had the worst run out you could possibly have last year with injuries, they're still obviously loaded. I feel sorry for producer Adam, who's a big Washington fan, and they were on the upswing at the end of last year, but this division just has 3 teams that all have legitimate dreams of going to the World Series. I cannot wait to watch NL East baseball next year.
No,
Yeah,
the
it's gonna
Braves
be
were
super fun.
the World Series favorite on opening day last year, which is easy to forget.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about the other move that the Yankees made. Obviously, we in general already talked about the winter meetings at the top. Just to note that it was $1.3 billion were doled out at the winter meetings. Obviously, when you have 3 contracts that were signed that were each over $180 million, that is going to push up the overall amount in there. Max Fried was a big signing, going to the Yankees. It was an 8-year deal worth $218 million, 4th largest contract for a pitcher ever, largest contract ever for a left-handed pitcher. He has battled some forearm injuries, both in 2023 and last year, though it hasn't required surgery, which I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. James, what is your reaction to this? Obviously, the Yankees doubled down on starting pitching and said, if we can't get Soto back, we're going to have just a ridiculous rotation, with Garrett Cole, Max Fried, Clark Schmidt, Carlos Rodon. Do you like the fit with Fried in New York?
I do like the fit. I think it's good for the Yankees to get left-handed pitchers that both get strikeouts and mitigate hard contact. It'll always be really important when you play in that stadium. I think the 8 years was crazy, but the Yankees also spread it out to get the AAV down to $27 million, which that plan worked so well with DJ LeMahieu, so I definitely can't see it going wrong again. But Fried in my mind is the exact same thing, but in totally different directions, where I'm like, I could so see Max Fried being a wily 38-year-old veteran with a 3.6 ERA, just grinding his way through the season, a la John Lester. But also, I know there's a guy that has already had a Tommy John surgery and has had multiple years worth of forearm strains and a flexor strain in his past. So I think that there's probably a little bit more risk on those 8 years than some people are giving credit because of the light injury history. It's not heavy injury history besides the one Tommy John, but it's always a nick and a scrape every year. It's always 160 innings instead of 190. I don't know. I think that was I don't want to say it was a panic move by the Yankees, but I think they were like, we have 24 hours after Juan Soto signs to do something cool. And they were like, we have to do this right now. But I wonder how many other teams were even offering him a 7th year, truthfully.
Apparently the Rangers did. And then a lot of the other teams were stuck around 6. I will say, when I was doing our winter meetings article, like, to me, this doesn't meaningfully change Fried's fantasy value, because obviously he went from a great team in the Braves to a great team in the Yankees. He went from a park that skews hitter friendly in Atlanta to a park that skews hitter friendly in New York. So I kind of had Max Fried as like a borderline top 15 starter in fantasy because of the potential injury concerns and the fact that he's not a huge strikeout guy. And that doesn't matter as much in real life baseball as it does in fantasy baseball. But to me, like, whatever you thought of Max Fried before this deal, you think of Max Fried now. And I like him for fantasy for sure. I don't like him as much as the other left-handed pitcher who is the talk of the winter meetings. Scott, the Red Sox missed out on Juan Soto. They missed out on Max Fried. They were allegedly balking at the asking price of Corbin Burnes, who was already on the older side. So instead, they swung a deal for Garrett Crochet, 25 years old, from the Chicago White Sox, 2 years remaining on his deal. Before we talk about the return here, what are as a Red Sox fan, you have an ace now. I mean, does that make you happy? Or are you like, what are your expectations for Crochet in 2025?
Over the moon for the Crochet trade. I was never thinking that the Red Sox and Soto was realistic. That I actually think the Red Sox legitimate. Interest was legitimate. I don't think it was a dog and pony show, but I just didn't think Soto wanted to go there. But this reminds me so much of the Chris Sale trade, right? Boston liquidates its prospect. I mean, they still have plenty of their top prospects they didn't trade, but high ranking prospects. They want to be competitive now. And unlike Fried, it's just hard for me to look at Fried. I always think he's 6'4", he's left-handed, he should have this great strikeout rate. No, he's really more about ground balls and limiting hard contact. He's got an ordinary strikeout rate. Crochet is somebody who blows people away. And another year removed from the Tommy John surgery, he has that unbelievable breakout year last year with the White Sox, and they were nice enough to step back from Crochet at the end of the year, knowing probably they'd want to trade him. Maybe Kyle Teal will be a special player. I realize the Red Sox traded their first round pick from last year. The haul that the White Sox got was realistic. I don't think they should feel bad about it. But anytime you could trade players who might be really good someday for somebody who's already great, who you have under control, and again, I don't know about Burnes in the back nine. I don't know what you're getting there. Fried is already 30. Crochet's 25. These are the peak seasons for Garrett Crochet. I think this is a sign that the Red Sox were, since that fourth championship in that window, they've traded Mookie Betts. They've downshifted to a big market team that acts like a medium or small market team. It's been frustrating for Red Sox fans. This Crochet deal signals that they're back in business and they legitimately could win the American League East this season. I thought the Crochet move was a statement of purpose of who the Red Sox want to be again. And it's very exciting as a Boston fan.
Yeah. And I a lot of the comments online, like, you'll see, oh, well, look at what he did in the second half. His numbers are terrible in the second half. He only threw 146 innings. Like, you have to understand the larger context of the White Sox essentially just shutting this dude down in the second half, basically saying you are never going to pitch more than 4 or 5 innings. And some of those starts, like, he was at like 55 pitches through 4 innings and had struck out like 7 dudes. And they're like, all right, you're done. Like, this wasn't just a pitch count thing. And obviously that messes with a pitcher's rhythm. And so some of those starts were terrible in the second half because this is the guy who was going out there to shove every time he got the ball, and he's just being yo-yoed around. So I really just encourage people to throw out the second half stats. You have to look at the larger context with that. And that adds to some of the innings concerns, right? He only threw 146. He probably could have thrown a lot more. I don't think he's going to be on an innings limit with the Red Sox. I understand it was his only breakout year, whatever. They were very legitimate pitch mix changes, adding the cutter, adding the sinker halfway through the year. Like, he became a different pitcher than he was as a reliever. This is very, very real. This is not a flash in the pan thing. And I had Crochet as my 5th ranked starter before the trade, and that was in Chicago, where he wasn't going to get a lot of wins.
Right. Supported by a horrible offense and a horrible defense. Remember too, his expected ERA on the batted ball data is 2.85. So anybody's like, oh, 3.58. What's so great about that? He pitched to a much better ERA last year. His Savant page is just a bunch of red sliders to the right. Yeah. I don't know that I'll have him as high as starting pitcher 5, Eric, but I think it's justifiable. Right, he's going to go in a very early round, and doesn't this look at the Chris Sale? Chris Sale had more on the resume when they made this trade, but it just there's just so much similarity. You're getting a big left-handed dominant pitcher who could legitimately be a Cy Young candidate. The first season you get him, and on the heels of them trading Sale and him rejuvenating his career in Atlanta, which was very painful too. So, and I know you were in on Sale last year. So when Eric analyzes these left-handed pitchers who have ties to the Red Sox, he usually comes up with the right conclusion. So I'm just going to assume that you're right on this.
I do love my power lefties. James, from the White Sox side of it, obviously the headliner here, Kyle Teal, 25th overall prospect for the Red Sox, probably an MLB ready catcher. Solid contact, smaller dude as a catcher. He's like 6 foot 180, has some pull side power, but he's not like a huge power hitter. You have Braden Montgomery, who is kind of potentially the best prospect in the deal. The Red Sox first round pick last year, an outfielder. From the Red Sox standpoint, you already have Jarren Duran, you have Wilyer Abreu, you have Ceddanne Rafael, you have Roman Anthony, you have Kristen Campbell, you have Miguel Blaze, you have like all these outfielders. It's like, okay, I can give up Montgomery. Chase Meadroff, infielder who can move all around, another guy who Scott loves, had more walks than strikeouts in the minors, huge contact rate guy, probably like a 10 homer, 15 stolen base type of dude. Again, Red Sox have Marcelo Mayer, have Kristen Campbell, have a bunch of, infield prospects that they didn't need Meadroff. And then Wilkerman Gonzalez, 22-year-old right-handed pitcher who has solid stuff, but has never really been able to put it together with any consistency. Do you see any of these guys being fantasy relevant in 2025? It feels like it's probably just Teal or Meadroff based on where they're at right now.
I see Meadroff as being the most fantasy relevant just because he played the full season AAA last year, and like Scott loves more walks and strikeouts. The White Sox have no players who should be slotted in anywhere almost the whole time, and there's a good chance that he gets 400 plate appearances as second baseman, like you said. Maybe winds up with 11 homers and 8 stolen bases. Back end of your DCs, that's good. I don't know why the White Sox keep trading for catchers. It's crazy to me that they would want to headline another trade for a catcher in 2 years. They've got Corey Lee, Edgar Caro, who I don't think they trust Edgar Caro defensively, so they can get a guy like Kyle Teal who has that true catcher's makeup. But then also I've seen some batted ball data on Kyle Teal, also doesn't seem very good. It's just amazing to me the Red Sox are able to pull this off without touching their triumvirate of like true 60 grade guys and Meyer, Campbell, and Roman Anthony, I think is a 70 grade guy. So shout out to them for this. Garrett Crochet is just, I think he's going to be a dream at Fenway Park. One of the most explosive fastballs in the league between zone contact rate, swing and miss rate. I understand why the White Sox would do it. I don't understand why no one else offered more, I guess. I think it's still a fine return, but it's just, I don't know. Every time I see one of these trades for a star for prospects, I'm like, it always feels light.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what they do with Caro, because Edgar Caro for the White Sox is also not like a huge hitter where if you moved him to first or DH, he's a plus guy. Like he's kind of another 15, maybe 20 homer bat. So we'll see how the White Sox handle that. James, I'll come back to you for 1 second and then we'll go back to Scott. But the last big signing before we move on from some of the big winter meeting stuff, I guess it was kind of right before, but Willy Adames going to the Giants. We talked about the Brewers before. This feels like a pretty big park downgrade for Adames, who was already coming off a career year. Do we think that people are going to overpay for Adames in fantasy drafts coming off that year, now going to San Francisco?
I think a bit, but I think that's mostly going to be because of the fact that he had a bad year, then a good year. Like the fact that he's yo-yoing like this, I don't really love that for my fantasy players. But also, San Francisco it's still not good at all. It's not horrific though for a right-handed hitter. It's much worse for a hitter. Globe Life is certainly a lot better. And I think Adames also benefited weirdly last year from an inordinate number of multi-run home runs. Like he was the king of the 3-run homer. He kept finding ways to do this. I don't know how or why. I still think the way that the shortstop tiers work out in the top of drafts, I think he's very comfortably in between the really good and then when it jumps down to the not so good. So I think he's still going to get drafted up because of that. And the lineup around him will still be fine. I think him and Matt Chapman together make up a really formidable right side of the infield. Helio Ramos makes up another good hitter in the middle of that lineup. I also don't think the Giants are done. Buster Posey seems hell-bent on turning this team contender immediately, trying to rid the stench of Farhan Zaidi out of the room and bring real baseball back to San Francisco. But Adames as a makeup guy, as a clubhouse guy, I don't see him failing. I don't see him doing 35 and 20 again with a near 800 OPS, but he's definitely a good will be valuable for us.
Yeah, I'm nothing really to add there. I'm still in on Adames. I think the lineup context will be equally as good. Scott, a few quick hitters here. Let me know if anything stands out to you, any moves that you feel like you want to kind of like touch on. Our old Red Sox boy, Tyler O'Neill, goes into the same division, but he goes to Baltimore. Nathan Eovaldi goes back to the Texas Rangers. Tyro Estrada is going to the Colorado Rockies. Alex Cobb signed with the Detroit Tigers. Danny Jansen signed with the Tampa Bay Rays, and Mike Tauchman goes to the White Sox. Any of those moves you feel like are worth addressing?
Well, tell me, do we have confirmation of what Baltimore's doing with their ballpark, with their dimensions in left field?
Moving the fences back in a little bit and decreasing the size of the wall a little bit.
Okay, because Tyler O'Neill, with reasonable dimensions, is going to hit 35 or 40 home runs. We knew that the Red Sox signed him on a pillow deal, and once O'Neill hit it, exceeded it, they probably weren't going to bring him back. And you get the massive platoon splits, right? But I love seeing him in Baltimore. A team, man, you wonder where is Baltimore in the Crochet business, because they had the prospects to get that trade done, and they probably have to be kicking themselves right now because they so badly need a marquee starter. But I think Tyler O'Neill will probably be the cheapest, most inexpensive or affordable 35 home runs you can get on draft day.
If Tyler O'Neill had an Anthony Santander type of year, I don't think it would surprise me in terms of they both are elite raw power guys whose batting average is like and O'Neill, obviously a better defender if you're talking about real baseball. But yeah, I mean, I think that profile is great in Baltimore. James, any of these quick hitting signings that interested you?
Tyler O'Neill will be better, more valuable than Anthony Santander this year. I think that contract's going to be better than Santander's will sign. I love Tyler O'Neill as a baseball player. He was awesome last year. As long as he just stays healthy, I think that's the big issue with him, as it always is. I wrote up Cobb to the Tigers. I think I'm the high man on that on earth. I don't know why. Everything he's done the last couple of years, he doesn't pitch very often, of course, but the Tigers have like 7 or 8 depth starting pitchers to make up for the 70 innings that Cobb's going to miss. You get 120 innings out of Alex Cobb. He's barely a top 600, 700 pick in fantasy baseball right now. He's going to be in the back of most of my rosters. I think that's fun. And Mike Tauchman and Tyro Estrada are going to play so much baseball next year. A hilarious amount of baseball on the Rockies and White Sox. They're going to put up a lot, like when I say big numbers, they're going to make what JJ Bleday did last year look like child's play.
weirdly, I can't believe I like a Rockies move, but I love the Tyro Estrada move for the Rockies. People forget, like, for 2 straight years, he hit at least 260 with 14 homers and 20 stolen bases. Last year, he battled injuries, and so those numbers were depressed. But if this is a 260, 15, 20 guy in San Francisco who goes to Colorado, like, does he become a 270, 280 hitter? Because we know Coors boosts batting average. And then is he a 15 homer to 18 homer guy who'll swipe 20 to 25 bags? Like, while playing, probably hitting up high in a lineup that we know isn't going to be great. So the counting stats aren't going to be great. But, like, that's a really usable middle infielder in pretty much any format.
Yeah, he'll be really affordable for ADP too. Let me also just piggyback the Cobb discussion. I realize you talk about anybody's rotation right now, and it's going to look silly once the season starts and guys start getting hurt, especially Cobb. We don't know that he'll ever pitch a full season, but Skubal, Reese Olson, Alex Cobb, Jackson Jobe, Casey Mize, that's your top 5. I mean, I know Cleveland's always going to be a decent team, and Minnesota probably the same, but I fell in love with this Tiger team. I know their run in the second half or maybe the final quarter of last season felt kind of unsustainable, but so many of their best players are still on their front nines, and you have a smart front office. Ironically, there were traders at the trade deadline, and for just reasons. I wish they had gotten more for Jack Flaherty, but I don't see any reason why the Tigers can't win as many games as they did last year, maybe even a few more. It's going to be a fun season in Detroit.
And Cobb spoke glowingly of the Tigers pitching development, which is part of the reason he decided to sign there, use Jack Flaherty as an example. So, I mean, those things, we discuss how those things matter to players. They matter to players, and the players are seeing, the pitchers are seeing what the Tigers are doing. And I think they'll be able to find some other guys. We're going to talk about some of these other signings in just a second, but before we do that, the stars of the PGA Tour and the LPGA Tour team up in Naples for the Grant Thornton Invitational. Find out if Lydia Ko and Jason Day can defend their title in Florida from today, Friday, through Sunday on NBC, Golf Channel, and Peacock. Yeah, it's 29 degrees in New York right now and freezing, but people are playing golf in other places, guys. They're out there in the sun. I might just turn that on just to see people in the sun and just imagine what it would be like to just be in the sun right now. We got to talk about some other deals, though. James, I'm going to go to you. Another closer on the move. Jordan Romano was non-tendered by the Blue Jays coming off the elbow surgery he had over the summer. Important to note, not a Tommy John elbow surgery. There was thought that Romano could return at the end of last year had the Blue Jays been in contention. They were not in contention, but as of now, he is expected to be healthy at the start of 2025. So the Phillies swooped in and nabbed Jordan Romano. Are you this seems like a pretty good signing for the Phillies. Are you concerned about the elbow? Like, where does Romano stack up for you?
Yeah, my first instinct here was just being embarrassed on behalf of the Blue Jays. The fact that they non-tendered Romano, their longtime closer, and the Phillies signed him for barely any more money than they let him go for. Yeah. At the same time, a team is allegedly bidding for Juan Soto. It doesn't really add up in my mind, but I digress. You just kind of have to throw out the last year of Romano because he was dealing with something. And the Phillies have gotten to this point, pitching development, where now they're in a spot where you trust them. Like, I trust when the Phillies bring in a pitcher that they're not stupid. They're going to have a plan. And losing the top 2 relievers from their bullpen last year in free agency so far, Carlos Estevez and Jeff Hoffman, feels like Romano just very easily going to slot into that closer role with Ryan Kerkering as support. It seems like a no-brainer for them. Kerkering is decent insurance. They got Tanner Banks at deadline too, and they have Matt Strom and Jose Alvarado as high leverage lefties. Seems like Jordan Romano is just, as long as he's healthy, which is still definitely a big if, it seems like a no-brainer from all parties here.
Scott, are you cognizant or a little bit gun shy because of the injury, or Romano's been good enough for enough years that you're willing to take that gamble again?
I don't see any reason why he can't get 30 saves and be healthy for the majority of the year. Again, we're talking about a reliever here. I'm more nervous about starting pitchers because it's just much more of a grind, and asking Jordan Romano to pitch, 15, 20 pitches 2 or 3 times a week. I don't see why he can't do that. And I agree with James that there's certain organizations that you trust when they make certain types of moves. And Philadelphia has earned the goodwill to, for us to trust what they're doing, trust their process, trust their medical outlooks on guys. So yeah, Jordan Romano to me, I think is a great value pick in the early part of draft season.
I have some funny ADPs for you guys, just because these free agency happens, these drafts change a lot. So up until this point, which is going to change, Jordan Romano is at 355 ADP, and Trevor McGill has a 298.
Interesting. So because obviously there was assumption that Devin Williams was going to be traded anyway. So I think people were drafting McGill assuming he was going to close. I would bet that jumps up a little bit, but I think people are already operating under that assumption. But yeah, I expect Romano to shoot up boards.
All the more reason to try to draft as early as you can, right? I mean, maybe drafting before the calendar year changes is
if you're lucky
for people, but you can go if you think you can see where the puck is headed before the rest of the market, you can get to react. And I realize people are going to get hurt and everything, but that's not maybe as much of a problem in baseball as in football, where the rosters are smaller and the injuries are more severe a lot of the time. But if you think you can anticipate the market moves better, get in on those early drafts.
Yeah, you got it. You're rolling the dice, but it certainly can work out for you. You mentioned really trusting the Phillies organization. I think we've come to trust the Dodgers organization, especially when it comes to signing veteran outfielders to short-term deals, who seem to always kind of turn around and have great years for them. They got way more production out of Jason Hayward than we expected them to. Obviously, that fizzled in the end. They got a great year last year out of Teoscar Hernandez. They may be bringing him back. But Scott, the Dodgers signed Michael Conforto this season. Conforto's coming off a solid season with the San Francisco Giants. He hit 237, but he had a 309 on base percentage, a 450 slugging percentage, 20 home runs, 66 RBIs in 130 games. Conforto's always been a pretty solid, like, quote unquote professional hitter. Listen, he's not the same guy who for 3 years, from 2017 to 2019 with the Mets, was hitting at least 27, 30 home runs a year, looked great. The injuries kind of sapped a little bit of that ceiling, but this feels like a pretty strong signing from the Dodgers, getting a really good hitter who could push 20, 25 homers at the bottom third of that order, which was a pretty bad bottom third of the order last year. Are you in on Conforto right now, Scott, given his new home?
Yeah, I'll play it according to market. Just interesting the trade-off he made last year, where his OBP collapsed, but his slugging percentage bounced back to a decent spot, and that's in San Francisco, which we know is not a great place to hit. Now he goes to LA, where it's generally a really good home run park, especially during the daytime. And you mentioned the Dodgers. I don't know that Hayward ever did anything that made me feel tingly. It's just strange to run out of his career how good he was early on, and then he just seemed to lose it and started grounding out the second base every at bat. But although still the angelic defense, and by all accounts a great teammate. But Hernandez was a hit. I don't know if they'll bring him back or not. And you mentioned a key point with the Dodgers. They win the World Series, but quietly it wasn't. We think of the Dodgers, oh yeah, their lineup 1 to 9 is loaded. No, it wasn't last year. It was very top heavy. Not as top heavy as the Yankees were, but ironically, they make the World Series too. But we're used to the Dodgers going 9 deep. And this is just a sign that I think they're going to eventually get back to being one of the best 1 to 9 lineups, a lineup that turns over regularly. And anytime you can have Conforto in the second half of your lineup, he may bat 7th for them on opening day. Yeah, I think it's a great move for them. And it defines, it's easy for these teams to go out and sign top of the market players, but it's a lot of times it's these depth signings. In Conforto, I always think of him being hurt, but I mean, he actually has played about 75 to 80% of the time the last 3 seasons. I think the Dodgers would probably sign off on that. I think wouldn't use him against all left-handed pitching. We know they brought Tommy Edman back, who can play all over the field too. I think a pretty nice under the radar move by them. The only problem you have to ask yourself is that if Conforto isn't a quasi platoon, does that make him playable in like a medium mixed league where you're going to have to deal with the maintenance, or even if you're in a daily transaction league, they play all those West Coast games. Sometimes that can make it a chore knowing whether or not Conforto should be in your lineup or stuff like that. But I think it's probably a better real life move than it is maybe a fantasy valuable move.
I'll tell you a real life move that I don't understand. And maybe James can provide a little bit of just logic to the situation. But Jake Berger, who is signed at a reasonable contract until 2029, was traded by the Marlins to the Texas Rangers for 3 prospects, none of whom ranked inside of the top 15 in the Rangers' own organization. I don't get it, James. Why now? They said they felt like this return was worth moving Berger right now, but like this is the guy who's been relatively consistent. Honestly, actually, eerily consistent. He's hit exactly 250 in 3 straight years. Here are his on base percentages over the last 3 years: 302, 309, 301. Like, this is a dude who's going to hit 250 with like a 305 on base percentage.
He's the new Chris Davis, right?
Yeah, and he's going to hit 30 home
there.
runs. And he's going to hit 30 home runs. And I just don't get why the Marlins felt like they needed to move on from him. Like, what are we doing here?
No idea at all. Also, along with writing up Alex Cobb, I did also write up Michael Conforto and Jake Burger. So I'm the king of the small transaction over here. Fantasy baseball team, but I can't believe it. Like, in my write-up, I tried to get inside Peter Bendix's brain and try to figure out why a small market team would do this. And again, like, maybe you just have to think to yourselves, like, all right, this guy has 4 years left. We stink. We're not competing for 4 years. He's one-dimensionally, can't play the field. On June 1st last year, we thought there was a chance he could be a non-tender candidate in 2 years. Because if you guys remember last year, the first 3 months, Jake Burger was abysmal until he caught wicked second half. Like, he looked like someone who was literally unplayable on a major league team. And even at his best, it's 30 home runs, but it's only 305 on base percentage. So they're like, you know what? Let's just take 3 grabs of the mystery box right now. And truthfully, I don't think any of the prospects they got are special at all. Max Acosta was a shortstop prospect who had thoracic outlet syndrome and now was going to be relegated for second base. And then Etri Vargas, another speedy second base type. So I can't believe the Marlins are continuing to do this thing.
Right.
Acquire second baseman. And then Brian Mendoza it's good stuff. It's a lefty with command and a changeup that really never goes out of vogue. But I don't know, for the Rangers, then you give up 3 prospects, like you said, not in the top 15, known with a modicum of ceiling. And you get someone who is going to be your DH for hopefully 150 games next year. When you had the second worst production all of baseball of your DH spot last year with a 65 WRC plus. And I have the slash line in this article somewhere. I'm going to find it right now. And where is it? I can't find it right now. But Robbie Grossman, the most games played for the Rangers at DH last year. Robbie Grossman. Now you're going to get the slot in Jake Burger, and at the same time, you get insurance for Josh Young, who always finds a way to get injured. It seems to be a no-brainer for them. Oh, here's that Ranger slash line DH. 205, 261, 323. That's a backup catcher slash line. They got that from their.
Well, that's because they have Mitch Garver there a lot, who was basically a backup catcher, so that makes sense.
No, it was such a no-brainer for them. They got a lot better while giving up almost nothing that can ever help them in the future.
Why does Miami make this trade right away? This is like coming over half court and jacking up a 35-footer, and your name isn't Steph Curry, right? I mean,
and you're like, well, the shot was open. Well, okay, you're going to get an open shot later too.
This is a player who's going to have value to 2/3 of the league, and you don't touch their top prospect. I'm not saying Jake Burger's going to get like the Crochet return, and even that might have been light, but I don't understand Miami. I can't remember the last time they made a move that makes any sense to me. And I just looked up their lineup on Roster Resource, their projected lineup. It made me want to cry.
I know. In hindsight, they're getting Xavier Edwards from the Rays was a great move. But to James's point, like, how many light hitting, speedy middle infielders do you need? And yes, the Marlins love a changeup. So getting Mendoza, who has a plus changeup, makes sense. And I have no problem with the Marlins getting young starting pitching with potential plus tools, because the Marlins have proven they can develop pitching. But so I'm intrigued by one of the 3 guys they got in a deal for Burger, and that guy isn't even a sure thing and is far away. I don't know. And Scott, from the other fantasy point of it, like, Burger is both first base and third base eligible in every single format based on games played last year. I feel like him moving to Texas, you've got to like him for fantasy purposes, right? You can play him at 3 different spots or 4 different spots if you include utility. The lineup is going to be great. Miami is not a hitter's park, so him hitting 35 homers in Miami, I mean, he has the power to hit 35 in any ballpark. And if you're getting a 250 batting average in the Rangers lineup, like, that could be a pretty useful. I don't think that much different than what we thought Young was going to do.
Right. And having done the Lindy's mock draft and in the middle of this Rotoworld draft right now, I think people may not realize yet that the corner market is kind of shallow. It gets late early at first base and third base. So anytime you can get somebody like Burger, who's in the middle of his career, who's surrounded by other good offensive pieces, who I think has a pretty good floor. We talked about how projectable he is, the comparison to Chris Davis, a guy who you have a good handle on what he's going to be. And maybe there's a tinge of upside just because there's better pieces around him. Jake Burger is going to go in a digit round this spring, and I hope people are ready for that.
Let's talk about the other big trade. I guess it's big trade. The other trade that happened at the winter meetings. It was a 3-team trade. The Toronto Blue Jays got Andres Gimenez from the Guardians. They sent back Spencer Horowitz. The Guardians then flipped Spencer Horowitz to the Pirates for two young pitching prospects, but also my guy. I've written so many words on Luis L. Ortiz this past year. He goes to the Cleveland Guardians. This seems like an interesting move. I covered it on NBC Sports. There's a ton, in the article, so feel free to give it a read. I will say that, look, in 2022, when Gimenez first came over from the Mets, he had a great year. The 2 years since then have not reached that. He was a 3.8 WAR player in 2023, a 2.8 WAR player last year. We know he has elite defense. We know that he will score somewhere between 65 and 75 runs and drive in somewhere between 60 and 70 runs. The batting average has come nowhere close to when he hit 297 in 2022. His on-base percentage is not great. He's not a leadoff hitter, despite being a 30 stolen base guy. The Blue Jays have George Springer, who's probably still going to lead off, and Bo Bichette, who's probably still going to hit second. So Gimenez is moving from being the sixth hitter for the Guardians to being the sixth hitter for the Blue Jays. The Blue Jays offense was worse than the Guardians offense last year. I get this from a real life perspective from the Blue Jays because there's over $90 million left on Gimenez's contract, and the Guardians were happy to move off of that. The Blue Jays can eat that amount of money. They are getting elite defense at second base, which, if you're trying to entice pitchers to come to your team, makes some sense. Spencer Horwitz was not a second baseman. They didn't need him at first base. So I get that from the Blue Jays standpoint. It doesn't move the needle for me for Gimenez. And I guess we can tackle that first. But Scott, this doesn't change your opinion of Andres Gimenez, does it?
No, I mean, this is a salary-related trade and a defense-related trade. I mean, Gimenez was also voted the best defensive player overall, regardless of position last year. I forget what they call that, the platinum glove or something like that. So I'm still trying to get out of my mind that play he made against the Yankees in the playoffs. Just an unbelievable range. So good news if you're a Toronto pitcher, I guess. But Cleveland wanted to move off the contract. And you're right. We have to kind of forget that 1 year he almost hit 300. He's just never going to do that again. He's just not selective enough at the plate, and he may not even get to 10 home runs. So another player who's better in real life than fantasy. Where's he going to hit right now? He's slotted maybe to hit sixth. I don't think they're ever going to move Springer off the leadoff position, even though they probably should, as OBP was barely over 300 last year. So it's a strange time for the Jays. It's the walk year for Bichette and Guerrero. I don't know that they want to stay here. If Toronto's not in contention, do they think about trading those guys? There's a lot of moving parts, but I love watching Gimenez play defense. I don't really love watching him hit these days.
James, what about the Pirates side of it? Spencer Horwitz he's intriguing, right? And he's going to get every day at bats in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I found myself covering the Blue Jays ad nauseum last year for Rotoworld, and I fell in love with Spencer Horwitz, just the plate discipline, the power, the contact. I think he's quite a good hitter. I think it's funny if they make this trade and you look at the player ages and you realize Spencer Horwitz, I think, a little bit older than Andres Gimenez, even though he's played 1,000 less, 700 less major league games. But at least going to a place like Pittsburgh, he's going to get at bats. The lineup should be better. It's really, I don't know if O'Neal Cruz takes a step that we all hope and envision he takes a step, along with Brian Reynolds still being a very good hitter. And if Brian Hayes ever wakes up, I don't know, you suddenly have someone who's in the middle of a lineup that has some good hitters at least around him. It's not that bad with the guarantee of playing time. I like that. And it's just getting off that Gimenez contract for the Guardians seems amazing.
Oh, huge.
Just
huge.
incredible.
Do you think Horwitz needs to be a platoon guy? Because last year he didn't hit lefties at all.
Yeah, for sure. Totally.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it.
But you're on the strong side, and that's not a bad thing to be.
Also, if you want optimism for Brian Hayes, I'm sure Eric will find it between now and opening day.
I think we're done with that, Scott. I think I've turned the page there. Listen, from the Guardian side, a couple things that stood out to me when I wrote the article. Obviously, the pitchers are Michael Kennedy and Josh Hartle, who are 20 and 21 years old. So we don't need to really discuss them right now. There's a long way to go. The Guardians do develop pitching relatively well, and so we'll see what they do there. Luis L. Ortiz, 25 years old, was a top 100 prospect. Could not find the strike zone. So in 2024, he adds a cutter and goes more sinker cutter heavy, to dial back the four-seam fastball usage. The cutter winds up being a really strong pitch for him in terms of just being able to find the zone. The slider misses some bats. I think that he has a pretty strong year overall for the Pirates. And I think that the Guardians, again, if they can get him more successfully using the four seam up in the zone with 2 strikes? Can we tweak the slider a little bit so it misses a little bit more bats now that you have pitches in the cutter and the sinker that are good within the strike zone? Like, there's another level for Luis Ortiz at just 25 years old. I will be drafting tons and tons of shares of him because I already was intrigued by the skills. Now I love the context he goes to. Obviously, that it's a better team too, so better chance of wins, things like that. They need starting pitching depth. I think they're going to give him the opportunity to just go. So I love that from the Guardian standpoint. And then another name I found myself intrigued by here is Juan Brito, who's the 23-year-old second baseman for the Guardians, who right now feels like he has the inside track to start at second base. Obviously, the Guardians have a lot of, the Gabriel Arias and Brian Rocchio, and we'll see how that all shakes out. Brito was the guy they got back for Nolan Jones from the Rockies. In 144 games in AAA last year, he hit .256 with 21 homers, 13 steals, a 13.5% walk rate, and a 16% strikeout rate. So even though it doesn't, meet Scott's criteria of more walks than strikeouts, it's pretty darn close. And that's another like high contact rate, hitter for the Guardians, who has the ability to like hit 15 homers and 10 steals while batting like 250, 260 at the big league level at the bottom of the lineup. Like, that's intriguing. And then Travis Bazzana, the Guardians' top prospect, he's probably going to start the year in Double-A. He is a second baseman. Like, that cleared the way for him. That's why they did this. He might not be ready in 2025, but he'll be ready in 2026. And they can't have Gimenez for 5 more years when this guy is coming.
I want to sign off on the Ortiz endorsement. Just the perfect type of pitcher to put in the back end of your rotation or maybe on your bench. We know Cleveland, even with Gimenez being traded, they always have a plus defense. Kwan's an elite left fielder. It's going to be a competitive team. You want to be the Central divisions are the places to pitch. Obviously, Ortiz was already in the NL Central, but it's hard. It's a much more jagged life if you go to the AL West, NL West, AL East, NL East. So he lands in the right area with a team that's probably more than even money to make the playoffs again, and will be, I think, one of the 5 or 6 best teams in baseball defensively, because they almost always are. So again, you're betting on infrastructure, right? That Cleveland knows, okay, yes, this guy pitches the contact, he pounds the strike zone, he turned a corner, he's entering age 26 season. I think a lot of things line up for Ortiz, and yet because the strikeout rate is so modest and he doesn't have that much of a resume in the major leagues, I can't see his ADP ever getting that expensive.
Agreed.
He's a perfect second half of your draft where you're thinking, okay, at this point, I have my sure things, I have my foundations. Now I'm trying to take maybe some lottery tickets and some guys with some latent upside. I think Ortiz checks a lot of those boxes.
Yeah, I think Ortiz's price goes up a lot in this first spring training start when you see a sweeper with 24 inches of sweep on it. And then the color's now his primary pitch. And oh my gosh, Luis Ortiz just got a 40% whiff rate in his 2 spring training starts. That's when it goes up.
I was going to say, he's a weird mix of like, it seems like the floor is pretty safe because this new pitch mix gives him pretty solid ratio floor without the strikeouts, but then the upside is also there if he gets the strikeouts. So like, I'm really big in on Luis Ortiz. We're going to pivot to like what comes next. But before I do that, we got to talk about, hopefully, much better football game than one that we saw on Thursday night. It's an NFC battle in the Pacific Northwest on Sunday night when Jordan Love and the Packers square off with Geno Smith and the Seahawks. Coverage begins at 7 p.m. Eastern time only on NBC and Peacock. Packers in the playoffs, Seahawks fighting for a playoff spot. Should be a really, really great game.
That Seattle defense has been fantastic since the bye week. Mike McDonald, not just the king of yacht rock, but doing a great job with that first year Seattle job. And man, JSN taking over as the receiver to get is Zach Charbonnet. He was the best running back in week 14. Sounds like we might not see Kenneth Walker again. So Charbonnet could blow up the slate. And the Packers have tons of star talent. Matt LaFleur, one of the best coaches in football. All those good receivers, maybe too many for fantasy at times, but a lot of talent in that room. Josh Jacobs, one of several veteran running backs who changed teams, who's made it work out. Yeah, I think these are 2 playoff teams. I think they might play again in the playoffs, and really excited to see them go on Sunday night.
Yeah, we'll hit these last ones pretty quick because we're just going off of rumors that we hear. These are the next big things that are coming. So there's not really as much analysis other than just like what are our predictions at this point. James, I'm going to start with you. The biggest name still out there is Corbin Burnes. He has been linked to the Giants and the Blue Jays primarily, with the Red Sox still kind of flirting around it. Where do you think Burnes ends up?
Yeah, Scott anointed the Red Sox as back before, but they're still yet to spend any real money. So I don't know how back they are. This might be the trick of being back. But Burnes seems to has a buyer beware on him. Doesn't seem like a lot of the big organizations are really ready to go for him. He's been linked most heavily to the Giants. Bob Nightingale said it was done like 2 days ago. No, Bill Madden said it was done like 4 days ago, and Bob Nightingale said it was close 24 hours ago. It seems like they're trying to go to a market that might not really be there. The Corbin Burnes sweepstakes might exist a little more into the winter than a lot of the other moves we've already seen. But to me, the Giants make the most sense. I don't know if I'd give him 10 years, but maybe they will.
God, no, I would never give him that contract. Not only that, I'm not going to draft Burnes. I'm really so many things trending in the wrong direction. I think he's a dangerous player to sign, and he's a dangerous player to draft into 25.
I am in on Corbin Burnes. I think he fixed this. He fixed the cutter at the end of the season, and so I'm in on him from a fantasy perspective. Again, I think that people who say he lost the cutter, I think we're skipping over what happened at the end of the year. I agree that like there's a lot of innings pitched. There are some concerns in the workload, and I will acknowledge that for sure, even though I think all starting pitchers are inherently risky, yada 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 yada. But listen, he's a 30-year-old with a lot of innings under his belt, and so I understand teams being like, I'm not giving 8 years unless there's opt-outs in there or things like that, because we have seen a lot of teams basically just say like, I'm not giving really long contracts to pitchers over 30. We just understand how inherently risky they are. So it'll be interesting. I think James's point that he made earlier, that Buster Posey wants the Giants to be in contention right now, I think inevitably ponying up for Corbin Burnes makes sense. I think that they go ahead and do it. And I think they get it done. And that would be my bet on where he ends up. I think the Red Sox, as much as they could use him, I think the Red Sox seem more prone to trying to trade some of their still surplus hitting to get, they don't need an ace anymore, right? They need an SP2, SP3, whatever. I mean, they could use an ace, but it's not as glaring a need as before they had Crochet. And so I think they could make a move. And I guess, Scott, I'll pivot to this. It's lower on the rundown, but the big rumors are, the Red Sox are talking to the Mariners. There's a lot of interest in Luis Castillo now. Luis Castillo's contract, which is still for 3 more years, looks super affordable when you now think of like what some of these other pitchers are getting. I know there were rumors that it was like Casas straight up for Luis Castillo, which everybody basically shut down and said the Red Sox aren't doing that. Like if you also threw in like Randy Arozarena or like, if you gave other things to the Red Sox, they would do that. But do you think that the Red Sox and Mariners can land on something? I mean, it seems like the Mariners have a surplus of pitching. The Red Sox with Abreu, Casas, like they have young hitters. It feels like the pieces could fit here.
Right. Yeah. It's like they should dance, right? They're looking at each other. They're smiling, they're looking away. The body language is good. Let's get something done. This is how fantasy trades get done, Eric. You have a depth at one position. I have depth at another position. So it doesn't feel like a sting when you make the trade. And now that they've made the splashy move for Crochet, I really hope they don't go for Burnes. And I agree that San Francisco probably makes a lot of sense with what Posey wants to do there. They've already signed Adames. And Burnes also, go to a park where some of your mistakes will get hidden. That won't happen in Fenway Park, but it will certainly happen in San Francisco. I think it's an excellent chance. And the great thing with Seattle is any price point you can do well. I want to draft all these pitchers too. Of course, Castillo leaving the womb of that park will hurt a little bit, but he's been so durable. He's still a strikeout pitcher. I would love it if they get anybody who's currently projected in their rotation. I'd be fine with it. It would be different price point for the different guys, but yeah, this just makes too much sense. And I think Seattle's a very reasonably run organization. I think the Red Sox with Breslow, I'm back to trusting them again. I didn't really feel great about the Bloom run, although I know a lot of times Bloom's hands were tied by what was mandated above him. But I think eventually a trade gets done, and really anybody in their top 5 would be welcome in Boston.
Yeah, I think if I'm giving up Casas, I need to get Brian Wu or Bryce Miller back. If I'm getting Castillo, I think something built around like Willy Abreu makes some sense. Willy Abreu doesn't really fit in Boston anymore with Roman Anthony coming and all the other outfielders that they have.
The key is just hang up the phone if they want Anthony. If they want Anthony, just do not talk to them.
I mean, that doesn't happen. But I think you could easily get Abreu and prospects for Castillo, maybe Abreu and like Cutter Crawford. It's like he's a young, kind of intriguing pitcher. Maybe the Mariners think they can fix something. I don't know, but I think there are some pieces to get done there, and I think it could happen. James, a situation that also seems like it's going to happen. Seems like Kyle Tucker is going to be traded, and as of 5 minutes ago, there are reports that the Cubs continue to gain momentum as the clear destination. It had been Cubs and Yankees. After the Devin Williams trade, it feels like the Yankees are pivoting from getting Kyle Tucker. So do you think the Cubs get this deal done for Kyle Tucker? And considering the Cubs are also trying to move Bellinger, like, can you make sense of what the Cubs are actually trying to do this offseason?
It seems like the Cubs are trying to spend the same money and be better. And this is probably the most creative way for them to do it. I think also, I've been getting texts about it the whole time I've been on here. I've been refreshing Twitter nonstop for the last 15 minutes, seeing if this trade can actually happen. But I don't know. It's bizarre that from the Astros perspective, they would do this. I know the rumored return started with Isaac Paredes, who I guess is the exact perfect Alex Bregman, third base, Crawford box replacement in Houston. But the Yankees, I mean, I'm sure they're not going to get Kyle Tucker. But if Kyle Tucker leaves the American League, I don't think the Astros are even close to as good a full roster as the Yankees are. I really don't. I think that they're in a situation where even after losing Juan Soto, they're literally probably head and shoulders above every other team in the league. Maybe the Orioles and the Red Sox can get close if they start spending money. But if they don't start spending money, it's just them. I don't know. Trading a guy like Kyle Tucker, to me, doesn't make any sense. He's probably one of the 10 best pure hitters in baseball. It's all around. If you get a third baseman with a couple years of control, I guess you can squint and make it make sense, but I can't see it at all. I think Bellinger is a perfect fit for the Yankees, truthfully.
Talk about squinting, by the way. I squint, if you look at the Houston lineup without Kyle Tucker in it, it is, man, you need projective eyewear.
Or Alex Bregman.
Right. Yeah. I mean, right now on roster resource, Jonathan Singleton is projected to be their number 5 hitter. I do not want to live in a world where that happens. I realize there's a lot of time between now and opening day, and teams don't have to make sense in December, but
the Astros seem to not want to spend big money. Their offer to Bregman was the biggest offer they've made, but not as big as Bregman's getting from other people. They seem to want to trade Tucker because they don't feel like they're going to sign him to an extension. I guess that just segues into like Scott Bregman. Do we feel like he ends up in Houston? Where do you think Bregman ends up?
I think they probably keep. But there's another guy I'm worried the Red Sox might kick the tires on. He's a New England kid. He's such a back nine player. So many of his indicators are pointing in the wrong direction. And I just hate paying. We know how baseball is, right? You don't make as much money in the first half of your career and you get great, and then you get overpaid in the second half of your career. I don't want to be holding the bag on a deal like that. I think he's going to want a long-term deal. I don't think he signs a pillow contract. Eventually, maybe if Houston feels in a corner where they have to trade Tucker, I don't know why they'd want to feel that way. And by the way, I think the Yankees would do the Soto trade again, even the way it played out. Yeah, that's who Tucker is, right? He's Juan Soto. He's going to be next year. He maybe won't get the Soto deal, but he'll get a mega contract from somebody. And if you have legitimate designs on, you're one of the 4 or 5 teams that can win the World Series, why not just trade Kyle Tucker? Hope he likes your city. Hope he gets comfortable, and maybe he wants to stay there. It gives you a leg on re-signing him, or at least a better chance than you would have on the open market. But Bregman's a guy who I think is a dangerous player to sign. I think he's testing the market as he should. I think the odds are better than 50-50 he goes back to Houston.
I'd love to see him. He's been linked to Detroit in tangential ways. I think that would be cool, just because I'd like to see Detroit get like a pseudo big name player. He can slot in at third base there.
Him and Hinch have history
deeper.
for sure.
I kind of like that.
I wouldn't mind that. In Detroit, because Detroit has so much young talent that's underpaid, you can overpay for this type of contract. They have that set up now. So actually, I wouldn't mind him in Detroit, and they could certainly use some fortification to the middle of their lineup. And Bregman's on-base skills and his batting eye are always going to, even without the trash cans, he still spits on all those borderline pitches. So I'll give him credit to that. I actually think Detroit's a great fit. Where do you think Tucker's going to go if he doesn't go to the Cubs?
I think it's the Cubs.
It can be the Cubs within 10 minutes after we turn off these cameras.
And I will say, I know that Kyle Tucker is not going to get Juan Soto money next year, but I don't think Kyle Tucker, from a real life baseball standpoint, is that much less valuable to a team than Juan Soto, because we know he's a better defender. We know he's a better runner in terms of just like how dangerous he is on the base paths. And I think that makes up a lot of ground in the Juan Soto is a better pure,
just a little bit older, but
because of his plate
discipline.
Do we know about Tucker's defense? Tucker's defense is graded poorly since he's been in the major leagues.
It's better than Soto's, though.
Yeah, I think they're just too.
I think Tucker is a playable defensive outfielder for longer than Soto is a playable defensive outfielder.
Oh, in the future, yes, no doubt.
Yes, but yeah,
it's just two whatever corner outfielders.
It's more that I don't think the gap is astronaut. I don't think the gap is huge. I think there is a gap.
I feel like the clock is ticking on Soto moving to DH, where I feel like Tucker will be a slight maybe a slight defensive giveaway for the next 5 or 6 years, like he's kind of been, but he'll still in his early, age 33, age 34 season, he'll still have a glove.
Speaking of first base, James, we talked a little bit about Pete at the top. The other big name is Christian Walker. Who do you prefer, just in a vacuum, if you're signing a first baseman? Both these guys likely to get kind of shorter term deals because they're on the wrong side of 30. I don't know that they're getting like 6-year contracts here. But who would you rather sign if you were looking for a first baseman?
It's still Pete Alonso. Christian Tucker's best season in terms of WRC plus is right in line with Pete Alonso's worst season. I think that he's just going to be a significantly more productive hitter. He's younger. The way that the market's shaping up, I don't think you're going to have to give Pete Alonso 6 or 7 years anymore. I think you might be able to. We're getting to a point you might be able to get away with 4 or 5. Or I think it's a full dunk. I think Carlos Santana could blow this market up a little bit. You just mentioned the Astros having a big hole there. The Yankees still have a hole there. The Mets have a hole there. There's a lot of teams that would love to give Carlos Santana 1 year and see what they can do with Vlad Guerrero next offseason. The Mets definitely fall into that bucket considering how much money they're willing to spend, but I think Alonso's certainly over Walker, and I'm curious how long this offseason goes until Walker's like, I'll just take a pillow deal and head back to Arizona.
Yeah. Walker, much better defender than Alonso.
Much better defender.
But
also 4 years old. 4 years older, though. But we can't discount that.
For sure. There is a lot of power in there as well. So I think it depends, if it's strictly first base, DH, etc. Scott, I'm going to start with you to wrap this up. Final question. Who is the top starting pitcher left on the market other than Corbin Burnes? We already talked about Corbin Burnes. And I will just say for the purposes of this, other than Roki Sasaki, who we know is probably the best free agent starting pitcher besides Burnes on the market. However, he's going to be an international free agent. There's, all of the other components to this where, he doesn't really fall into the typical free agent starting pitcher. But you've still got Jack Flaherty out there. You've still got Sean Manaea out there. You have Walker Buehler. You have Nick Pivetta. And then you're getting into like the, Patrick Sandoval's, Jose Quintana's, I think Kyle Gibson is still a free agent still. But who beyond Burnes, who's the next guy for you?
Yeah, I'll just throw out my prediction that Sasaki signs with the Padres. Just a gut feel on that.
Yes, me too.
I'm going to say Flaherty. He's still in his 20s. It feels like he should be like 34 by now, but he's just into an age 29 season. And I know he wasn't maybe the guy that we expected him to be with the Dodgers, but he still struck out more than a batter per inning. And great comeback year with Detroit. Jack Flaherty to me, although Manaea is kind of tricky because just when I wrote him off and I didn't trust him at all, he had a great comeback season. He's obviously left-handed. His stuff will play well into his 30s, I think. But Flaherty would be my first priority of the players you listed.
James, what about you?
I agree on Flaherty, even though I still think he has like a big red blinking sign that says "Don't sign me," just because the velocity oscillations are scary for a player that young, and his effectiveness waxes and wanes so sharply with those oscillations. But out of that whole list, I mean, the Sean Manaea 32-year-old breakout wants a 4-year deal. Walker Buehler, no one knows what he's going to be. I don't even know what contract he's going to get. I can't predict him at all. I think Pivetta sneakily would become the most interesting of this group if he didn't have the qualifying offer attached to him. So I think the are left on the market for a reason. I think teams are really trying to wrestle with how much money and how many years they're willing to give them.
And that is the same with Christian Walker too. Christian Walker has the qualifying offer as well, and Pete as well. Yeah, I agree with you guys on Flaherty. I also will say Walker Buehler. I think Walker Buehler probably gets like a 2 or 3 year deal with an opt out after 1 or 2. Like I think you
can't give him a long-term deal. That would just be irresponsible. He needs some element of prove it in his contract.
And I think he probably wants like an early opt out, kind of like what Manaea had with the Mets, or I think it might have been Severino also had an opt out. Like these guys where it's like, hey, we'll prove it and see if we can get it
Blake
done.
Snell signed that deal. Different context, but
yeah. And then I will just throw out also, just keep an eye on. I was super intrigued by how Spencer Turnbull looked with the Phillies this year. He's going to be, way down the line in terms of priority free agent starters, but somebody's going to sign Spencer Turnbull to be their 4th or 5th starting pitcher, and I'm keeping a close eye on that because if it is a good team context or good park context, I will have radars up for Spencer Turnbull at the end of some deep league drafts. And you can keep it locked here with us. We are going to be back. We'll have another episode, when we get some of these signings come in. We'll talk about Corbin Burnes or Kyle Tucker or whatever. So, we'll hop on to break that news to you. Keep it locked to Rotoworld for the player news, for all of that kind of stuff. Follow all of us on Twitter or X to get our work. Obviously, there's a lot of work from Scott which is at Scott_Pianowski on Twitter. A lot of football work, but he's going to get into baseball. And we got some mock drafts coming. James is at James_Schiano. I am at Samulski NYC. Follow us there. Keep it locked to Rotoworld, and we'll check you on another episode of the Rotoworld Baseball Show.